Know Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. Our intention is to investigate the universal principles that have equipped our species to seek the treasure of all treasures, self-knowledge. With your host, Daniel Powinski and Eduardo Manteca, this is the Know Thyself podcast. All right, I think we're good to go. Welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. I'm Eduardo. I'm here with Daniel.
Hello.
And here we go. Today we're going to be taking on more of a conversation about a concept that Daniel and I decided to, bring up regarding most of the topics we've talked about in the last two seasons. And so I am excited, man, to kind of get into this idea of the square and the circle, which many of you might know. Some people might think of the square and the circle in regards to alchemy, with the center of the circle and the center of the square being the center of who we are. I mean, I kind of read a few different things regarding that as far as like what lies in the center of that square and the square being the four elements that surround the being, right? And then when you kind of look at this diagram in the square and the circle, I kind of like perplexing, physicists and all this other stuff. There's so much information on this that I'm glad to just have a conversation with you about it because what I read about it in regards to in alchemy, kind of really explains the whole micro and the macro that we've talked about. And of course, always going back to as above, so below, and so below as above. And so that's exciting that, in this topic, it's so open to interpretation, but also there's specifics about it that many people have probably done, a lot of studying on in regards to it. And I have like at least 3 or 4 pages here regarding what it might imitate and what it might really mean for this representation of this diagram. So I'll go with my notes along the way with Daniel as we kind of open up this conversation. Again, it's not really like one defined topic today as much as it's going to be sort of this open discussion, as I mentioned. So let's do it, man. I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, perfect, man. Great introduction. And this aspect of squaring the circle and what this entails. And to even approach this conversation, we kind of have to look at both elements of the square and the circle and what they represent. And you did a great job of explaining the square as the 4 elements and kind of the 4 cardinal points. So this is really going to represent materialization, and the circle is really going to be infinite consciousness.
Right.
And this aspect of squaring the circle is really this aspect of pulling this infinite potential, which we spoke about in alchemy as that one thing, and pulling it down into existence so it can actually be observed and experienced by consciousness. Right. And ourselves are the same aspect of this. And so really what we're dealing with here is the idea of the universal life force being electromagnetic energy, which is something that quantum physics is pointing to at this point. And all sciences, even material sciences, are leading to this understanding that this entire experience is an electromagnetic ocean that we're experiencing. And so the same idea as you can't look at the sun at 12 o'clock noon, right? It's going to damage your eyes. We've spoke about this before. You can't stare at the awesomeness of God. It would make you go blind. It's too overwhelming. So we talked about this, using the water to be a reflection of the sun,
right,
which is that feminine aspect, right? And using reflection to be able to perceive and understand that universal life force consciousness. And so this is what we're looking at today. What this squaring of the squaring of the circle is the aspect of creating a vehicle for this non-centralized energy of God that permits all things to take in occupation in this space that's provided. Right. Hence, what will be called Mother Nature. And so this universal life force is working all around us at all times. It's the space that's occupied and it's the space in between. And we've spoke about this, but what we're doing today is really taking this understanding of really spiritual electricity. And becoming a spiritual electrician, which is what Taoism is. This is what a lot of these esoteric principles are. What is Kundalini? It's a serpent that goes up your spine.
Right.
how does electricity move in the same kind of serpent-like fashion, which is also going to, again, elude what the Gnostics really claim about what the snake represents in the Garden of Eden. And it goes even deeper to this aspect. And all snake symbolism is going to kind of fall back to this aspect. But the idea that this non-localized energy, which is the universal life force, which we almost consider as the creative father and the kind of the masculine component of creation, needs to have housing. It needs to have a space for its energy to be dissipated in, because in its pure form, it's too awesome to see. And so it's what Mother Nature is, which is the wife of the cosmic father, provides forms for these energies to be dropped down like a drop down transformer to make this energy slow down enough for us to perceive it. And this is all things. This is animals, this is plants, this is non-life things. You know, these are the table that's in this room, the computer, right? Anything that takes up this space is connected to this electromagnetic energy. And what we are doing is we're perceiving the housing of this energy.
Right.
And so Mother Nature is a step-down generator, right? A step-down transformer, right? That lowers that energy, just like when you see power lines, you know, running in your neighborhoods, there's a step-down process there because that voltage is too powerful. It would blow away all your electronic devices, right? So it has this step-down aspect, and that's exactly what we're seeing, i.e. creation. This is the stepped-down energy of the universal consciousness taking in all of its forms. And now as we see through the evolution of consciousness, new forms are introduced for accelerated, deeper understanding of what consciousness entails, right? We're still playing with fire today, just like the ancients were, but our fire is in our electronic devices. We actually kind of plug into this energy. Okay. And so this energy is always around us. It's just depending now, are we aware of that? And so what the squaring of the circle is this awareness that this is all a vehicle for the expression of consciousnesses, which is not a new topic that we're coming through, but to understand the role of Mother Nature and how Mother Nature actually seduces the universal consciousness to come and take form. Okay, and if you've ever had a psychedelic experience, one of the things you notice is forms are not as defined. And there's actually kind of, you can almost see the energy around aspects, especially nature, anything that's actually kind of living through that process. And we see it kind of pushes through that form. And it's because when you go through those experiences, you kind of raise up that transmitter of perception, you know, because it's usually leveled at this one point. And so when we think about this spiritual process, we think of ourselves as spiritual electricians, and we're turning up that transmitter so we can perceive more of this pureness, consciousness energy. But this consciousness needs a vehicle to partake in. Okay. And so our vehicle is a vehicle of consciousness. This, you know, the plants, animals, rocks, everything is a vehicle of consciousness that has to take a unique form. And that's all what we're kind of looking at here is this aspect of this universal consciousness has to step down and take form in the feminine, and the feminine creates this housing, right? And this is why housing very much is, we see them in like squares, right? This is what this whole connection is. And even when you start looking at electricity in its general applicable ways, it's going to operate the same way of squaring the circle. And so that's kind of what we're looking at to kind of explore and think about in this conversation.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's what I referred to when I said the anima and the animus, right? The male and the female energies of the animalistic instincts that need to kind of come out of that, that box and go center within the fifth element just being that sort of like wholeness, the understanding the center point of what we're all trying to get to. And I feel like that's sort of something that you can come across a lot when it comes to sort of spiritual enlightenment or spiritual growth, is that you're trying to come out of the things that we've talked about even in the last couple episodes, even with Lucifer. It's just like where you choose to put your energy into and what desires you actually fulfill that take you away from that center point. And that center point being in that circle is finding that, you know, you got the four elements around you, and then you have the totality of the fifth element in the center, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and again, this aspect of this vessel, it's this vessel and it's this space for this understanding. But the same thing that desires consciousness to be pulled in, that the sacred feminine is calling in, is the same inner desire you have to explore your consciousness.
Right.
The same thing that's pulling this energy from the infinite to the finite so we can experience that same call, that same transmitter is the same voice that's within you to explore yourself and to explore this energy that is the emanation of this life force. Right. And we're really starting to kind of understand that fire and electricity aspect of our consciousness and how it responds to the sea of electromagnetic energy that we kind of find ourselves in. And that's kind of what this kind of vessel looks for. And so, it's so interesting because it's even hard for us, and we might have not even taken a moment to think about this today. And so let's afford this moment that we're about to approach with this thought that God is everywhere. So there's nothing to find him against because he is all things. Okay, even the forms that are taking are an emanation of this universal life energy, right? Which is electromagnetic energy, and so we have nothing to compare it against. Okay. And so there's this like almost this hide and seek that we spoke about in these past episodes, right? Where you literally can kind of go through your whole life and existence without seeing this energy, right? Which is that universal consciousness, which is very opposite to this mother energy. Right. Mother Nature needs you to see her. She desires you to see her. She calls out for your attention. Look at me. And even just the experiences we go through. She pulls you into this reality of experience this. When we go through, we have the most beautiful aspects that happen in Mother Nature, but we also can have the most, challenging things that we go through too. Yeah. And she calls your attention. Look at this. Look at me. Watch me. See me. It's this pulling, again, like this aspect of this seductive quality, but not so much seductive in the sexual, but just to pull you in. And it's the same thing what self-development is. It's the same thing of its self-knowledge is. There's like this inner voice that kind of calls to you. And this is the same thing that calls and pulls that universal life energy to take form for experience and for the further evolution of that consciousness. And so that circle, what that represents was this spiral of God that we spoke about. And this is what we also spoke about with time, how time is this formative aspect, right? But God is not just time and history, right? Because then he would be, if he was time and history, that would mean that there would be something that would have to kind of be on the outside of that. It's time, history, and all of the experiences in between and what we find ourselves in. And so that's the circle that's always spiraling in on itself, always giving new creation, always giving new blueprints. And the form that circle calls for and gets reception from and gives birth to is the vehicle, which is that sacred feminine, which is Mother Nature.
So it's like the physical and the spiritual.
It's like the physical and the spiritual, but this understanding that the physical is here to give space and understanding and exploration for the physical. Yeah. Okay, for the spiritual. Yeah. Okay, and like just this aspect. And again, when we speak about feminine and masculine, please go back to the episode of Law and Gender so you know that these are both components that live within inside of us. We both have male and female aspects. And actually, in the story of this, in the conversation, in the context of this conversation, we're actually all women in the eyes of this universal life force energy because we're all the vehicles of its energy. We're the reception of that energy. So if we are going to get into like an argument about that, we could actually really discuss it, the idea that we're all actually, this universal life source women, because it's that receptive energy of this universal life force that's kind of playing through us. But that's exactly what we're looking at here. We're looking at vessels for exploration. Okay. Even when you think about, the aspect of like romantic intercourse between any kind of partner. Okay. This is a universal law that plays with anything. So I'm not just talking about male, female. I'm even talking about same sex here. In that experience, there's usually somebody who's being receiving and being explored, and there's an explorer. So it doesn't matter what gender you actually are. You could be the female that's doing the exploring, but we take that aspect of creation and understand that there needs to be energy, there needs to be space for the energy to go into, right? This is exactly what creation is. Creation is the tuned down, the transformer has actually dropped down, okay, and it drops down to this vibration. And again, if you've had psychedelic experiences, like I kind of mentioned in the beginning, this is something that you can kind of perceive, and it's hard to kind of put your finger on what's happening because you kind of do see between the lines at this point, and you can actually kind of feel this vibration, and you kind of see the lovely desire of Mother Nature. Like, she longs to desire for consciousness to come take the form and to give it new vehicles, new expressions, give it the most beautiful of the snake skins as it kind of sheds its skin. It desires to give more forms of expression. It wants to give more forms of expression. Same thing with our self-development. The deeper you go, the deeper your desire is to keep going, right? It's the 1,000-petal lotus. It keeps unfolding, right? It's this infinite aspect. And that's exactly what this is. It's this desire to explore, this feminine aspect lives inside of us, and it says, explore me, look at me, find me, right? Release me. This is because this is the same thing. It's needing you to go down and explore this form and understand how this energy works. And again, this goes to anybody, whatever they identify as. This aspect and this component is within us. But to see it visually is a great experience. And it's how we actually can, quantify the experience of, like, even the space in between. And so when we were talking about, universal life force is hard to understand because we have nothing to compare against, because it is all things. And so we have to start understanding it in its isolated vehicles or its housing. Okay. And so anytime God's energy has to come down, it has to be stepped down. Okay. This is why the astrological houses are set up as 12 houses. This is a step down storehouse vehicle for energy for later dissipation into the micro, right? This is a macro house. Right. This is a large house, but it's breaking up the 12 energies of God, which when you look at kind of covers personalities and kind of completion in that realm. And so I want to kind of check in with you. Does this resonate? You felt okay?
I mean, I really, I think exploring what is inside of this diagram or this image, if you find it, can have endless ideas, come forth. And I think that what you're talking about right now is more, dialed into the idea of like what people have seen within the circle, because both the square and the circle have a center, right? And so, like, talking about the micro and the macro and how it's aligned in this way, or even, let's go back a second when you're talking about the circle being basically, as I was identifying with the spirit, you're talking about it, being God. I think that's a great place to start from, because, I don't understand why so many people have had trouble explaining this. It seems so straightforward, but I feel like what you're doing right now, to answer your question that you asked me, if this is sort of like resonating, the answer first is yes. But second of all, like, I want to keep opening up that door to what this is really encompassing, like with the square on the outside and the circle on the inside. I feel like, even what you're saying about the female energy is so important that I don't think people really have a true understanding of. And it's interesting because we use these words like feminine, masculine, and we have to sort of like make this declaration and pause and say, well, what we're really talking about isn't so much just the gender, but the energies that are involved. And so I think, yeah, man, I mean, so far so good. I mean, I'm just waiting to kind of understand like how they both work in conjunction,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're doing, is being able to explore the forms, i.e. creation, to find this universal energy and finding it in all things. So it does kind of allude back to that hide and seek aspect. And one of the things that is unique about this consciousness and this universal consciousness is, as you start approaching, there's a reverb that almost pulls you in, and you go almost little progress that's made towards this universal consciousness there's this rush of enthusiasm. There's this rush of expansion.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how we kind of approach. And again, it's finding that universal principle in this 5 cent cube kind of reality as well. Because with the form, the thing about the form is God's energy kind of spills over. It's this infinite energy that keeps giving. Well, that's opposite for the female.
Right.
The female recycles everything in this aspect. So the female aspect of component of consciousness recycles everything. Mother Nature recycles everything. Once we die, we already start disintegrating. We go back to the earth. We go back to the soil. Everything does. Everything returns back. And so when we kind of look at this aspect, it's finding that universalness within creation. And she's got the code of creation because these are the natural laws. And that's what she's dissipating. When we turn down the transmitter, the only way, the transformer, and it starts to take form, these forms are natural laws. These are the laws that we live by. And so this is what the idea of going with the flow is. You're now touching into that universal consciousness electricity, and you're grounding in it. You're walking with God in that aspect, right? You're grounding that situation. And that's what's going to help us kind of maneuver and more understand this 5 sense reality, because we are in a reality that life is finite. Everything is going to be taken by the sands of time. So what is the one thing that's going to be infinite? Where's the circle? Well, the circle is consciousness.
Right.
This is the great work. Really, and compared to your exploration of your consciousness, all other things are kind of second to that. Because again, we've spoke about this, the more expansion you have in this realm, the more you can share. And so when we're looking to square the circle, we're really focusing in on finding those universal aspects and that universal energy that's beyond these forms, but also at the same time celebrating these forms as the aspects of consciousness and creation that we can see and we can partake in. And again, exploring them, being a vessels for exploration, because again, not only our own vessel, which is kind of our chariot, but all of the things that we find in our surroundings. We don't see the electricity that's in the environment, but it's all what's making up. We're in this electric universe, right? And this is going to be the aspect of why in the Old Testament, the universal energy is always considered fire, right? And we kind of think about what this universal energy does of fire and energy and electromagnetic energy. Well, that brings light to the darkness.
Right.
All of a sudden, we're not afraid of predators at night. And then we learn that natural law even more. And now we're able to plug things into the wall and charge them.
Right.
So we've now taken this thing that looked like magic because we learned natural laws. We've taken the idea of it being magic because it's now de-occulted and it's used, and it's no longer magic, it's technology. When did that transformation change? When did it go from magic of lighting up a light bulb at maybe one of those city fairs in like the early 70s, 1880s to being this acceptable thing that like my niece is just like, what do you mean the iPad's not charged? Like it's just like coming at you. But do we see how when we learn natural laws, we can we get the reverence and the honor to be able to utilize these natural laws into the betterment of ourselves.
Right.
And, electricity does a lot of things. It gives a lot of comforts. It gives these technology, right? And, we don't really think about that. We don't think about the spiritual aspect of electricity. And I don't, because I'm always like Rage Against the Machine, and I'm like losing my phone every 5 minutes. Well, maybe that my perspective on that needs to be a little bit of adjusted.
Right.
Because this is a universal thing. And even when you look at the North American faceplate, that's not a coincidence that it looks like it's got two slits in the mouth.
Yeah.
Because you're plugging your outlets into the face of creation.
Yeah.
And that's what you're tapping into. And this is something that we just accept, but
we still call them males and females.
And it's exactly what it is. It's that reception and that insert. Okay. And so you have to know that code in doing electrician. That's going to save your life, knowing that aspect. Well, it's going to save your life in this realm.
Right.
Exactly. Understanding the negative, positive. How does this energy flow? How do I ground myself in the flow? What is the flow?
Right.
It goes down to the Trinity. Protons, neutrons, electrons.
Yep.
Okay. And these electrons are meant for us to bend to our will, but not our own will, the highest will of creation, universal consciousness, the development of that, not Daniel's will, right? The highest will. And that's what the white magician does. And it works tirelessly to align themselves, to be able to learn the natural laws, not to bend them, but to assist them in the creation and the evolution of consciousness. But, even think about like your breaker box on your house.
Right.
It's a rectangle. It's a square. They're squaring the circle. The circle is the circuit of the electricity in your house.
Right.
Boom. Housing. You have to drop down the housing of the electricity to be able to be used. What is the zodiac? Drop down transformer. Boom. It took that universal consciousness energy with all those together, drops it down into more of an understanding that consciousness can perceive. And now as consciousness weight raises itself up, the higher vibration it can perceive. And this is why you can talk to somebody about cause and effect, and they can understand the spiritual aspects of it. And then you can talk to somebody else about cause and effect, and they don't, because this person had a higher vibration.
Right.
Your vibe attracts your tribe, right? And this is something that we say, and it just kind of comes out. But there is a fundamental law that is literally the same law that is taking our voices right now and sending it across the world. Is the same law that it makes up the universe and it makes up the space in between. And just look what happens when we understood that natural law and what it was used for kind of creating light and, a little bit of safety and giving these kind of comforts to further explore consciousness. But isn't it funny that these capacities come with the evolution of consciousness? And again, I'm not one to say that electricity was the first time it was discovered. I think with things like the Baghdad battery and the experiences of the ancients, I think they had a great understanding of electricity. I think it was kind of something that was more of like a wheel and more of a cycle that we kind of lost connection with, hence maybe the Dark Ages and that kind of aspect of why it was maybe coined that. But we lost this understanding. Now, spiritually, we understand that it works, but that's because of the microcosmic and the macro, as above, so below, And so that's what we're really looking at, and kind of just understanding, even our relationship to electricity in this age of Aquarius that we find ourselves in. How are we utilizing that energy? Are we utilizing that for the great work? Or is this for, our own kind of dopamine, processors and just kind of to keep just to kind of keep us entertained. And so it's with great, I say this all the time, like, who knows, I would have quoted Spider-Man so much on this podcast, but like with great power comes great responsibility. But just this idea of electricity and this idea of like a step down aspect to be able to perceive the energy of the most awesome divine that we can't experience. And so it has to be kind of stepped down. And the mother gives that vehicle for experiences, and then we even think about the aspect of like childbirth. Well, that the woman is providing the vehicles for the fire, AKA the semen, a vehicle for that body to express consciousness. Right. So it's giving the space. And even if, again, same-sex marriages and they want to artificially inseminate and they want to have a child, more power to you. In the laboratory, it's doing the same thing to the egg, right? It's again, it's got nothing to do with that kind of connection, but it's universally still should be understood of what's kind of happening here. But there's a space giving for consciousness to kind of expand. And so we kind of think about this even like when we move into new spaces, these new spaces become these vehicles for new consciousness, new expression, moving to a new place, traveling, even going to a store that you've never been to. You don't think of it as this like female experience. But this is why when you ever ask like an old man what his car is named, 99% of the time it has a female name. And it's not so much because he's like thinking about his like old sweetheart from high school, but more of the time it's because this is where energy goes to manifest. It's the body, it's the vehicle, and it's the most beautiful aspect in the world, and it's what teaches us, and it's actually what gets us back up to climb back up to divinity. The ladder to heaven is the sacred feminine, and she gives higher, more purified expressions as we travel up. And this is in what you would call in Gnosticism, Sophia, which is so interesting because in the Gnostic story, we really get this idea that there was a female sacrifice, and she sacrificed it herself to be what would later become Mother Nature.
Right.
And so again, I'm really excited, and I think this is kind of where this conversation is kind of leading the podcast to, of a little bit more exploration in this aspect of Sophia.
And Gnosticism.
And Gnosticism,
Right.
yeah. And so Gnosticism plays a big role with Sophia. And again, they kind of have a little bit of a perception difference on what occurred with the snake.
Yeah.
And they really kind of see this aspect. And, on that comment and on that statement, they very much explore Sophia with this kind of Lucifer connection. And they kind of represent two of the same things. So kind of that energy we spoke about last week with the light. What are we talking about here? This is that electricity, right? This is that light bearer. When we think about Prometheus taking the light from heaven, well, what is that? That's the drop down transformer. Right. That's the drop down of that vibration down to an energy that we can perceive it. Well, the problem is when we drop that energy down and we perceive it, if we don't know these laws, it's going to hurt, because Mother Nature desires you to know. She's like, why can't you understand these patterns? I'm putting them out so beautifully in front of you. But again, we've made man-made patterns, which we've based off of creation, but they're kind of like almost like a mockery, know? And that's when we kind of get into the whole aspect of the legal system, the financial system, and even political systems, how they were based off of nature, but not so much.
Yeah.
And that's why we kind of live into two problems. And so that's kind of what we're kind of looking at approaching. And again, I know that when you say male and female energies right now, that's kind of like a supercharged conversation. But again, these are these aspects that live within us. And we both have both of those aspects. And again, if we think about it in this electromagnetic field, just like we spoke about, we are all actually the women and kind of creation.
Right.
Right?
I love everything you're saying, man. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Again, with the squaring of the circle of having the physical and the spiritual in one, you have to sort of decipher between, what comes with those four cardinal walls, and then what is actually lying within that electromagnetic circle of energy and everything that is divine. And I feel like, again, it's just always what we talk about, which is like raising ourselves up to the next vibration to understand what this all entails. And I feel like, we kind of keep doing this dance, and I think I don't know if it's for our own good. I don't know if it's put this way in nature, but we do this dance between those four elements, and then understanding, where it all kind of makes itself apparent in the center of the circle and the square all in one. I just think that this is how it's always going to go with regards to our understanding of the universal law and our spiritual development. I think it's always going to be this battle of understanding, because I feel like, one of the things that happens over us is we have a natural ability to perceive the four elements. You can see them, you can smell them, you can feel them, even if you have in your 5-sense construct some kind of disability, you still can feel one of many of those elements. But the true way of seeing it is, what is in that circle. And that's the hardest thing to accomplish, in my opinion, because we have this sort of this like evident four elements, four walls, the square that surrounds us, but we don't really take sometimes the next step, kind of like what you're saying about electricity and how we've taken it for granted. It's like, rather than like aiding in the evolution of consciousness, it's sort of allowing us to be in some very inverted fashion, like more not dumbed down, but sort of like, well, there's no need to explore where this energy comes from. It's already there for me. So therefore it's been discovered. And it's like, no, that's a lie.
Right.
Well,
and that's the tough thing about Mother Nature is there's beauty in even the illusion.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Even though deep down inside we know that, again, all this is this one energy, and the God is this combination of these male and female energies, right? But when we see the expression of it, again, having to be toned down to us in this female, that's exactly what we're kind of perceiving there, in this aspect of, again, localized pockets of this universal information. And this is actually why, you see in like Hindu art, they'll do Kali guard dancing on Shiva, which is God, and it looks like it's dead, but she's dancing on top of it. Well, what it's doing is it's pushing out those energy to go into those localized pockets. And, and one of those things is, you made such a good point when you were talking about how it's easy just to get stuck in kind of the four elements and the five sense reality, right? Because there is beauty.
Right. There
is all this aspect that kind of pull you in and think that this is everything. And it's so interesting because it's these manifestation of these natural laws. It's actually Mother Nature who punishes us when we break those laws. But this universal consciousness isn't impeding.
Right.
It's just always sitting there, and it's not uncomfortable, but it's always right there with you. And this is why when even your five sense reality begin pulling down on you and your whole life could be ending, there could still be a peaceness that you reach to, and it's right on your shoulder, and it's always been. And it doesn't call for your attention, where Mother Nature does. This doesn't. It's just always right there with you, and it's not awkward. It's actually kind of what's calling for us to explore, and it's who Mother Nature is trying to introduce us to.
Right.
It's like, I need you to meet your father, but we're all so damn scared, and so we just keep hiding in those illusions and those comforts that Mother Nature provides, and that almost getting overly nourished, and then she has to bring in her laws, and she is the ultimate law keeper, because these laws come from the Most High. So if you don't have respect for these laws, you don't have the respect for the Most High, you're not part of creation. And that's exactly what happens. And that's exactly where we, might find ourselves now. But the same thing that pulls the universe down is the same thing that pulls you within. The same thing when we were talking about the Hermetica, and we were one-on-one with the universal consciousness, right, and we were in that oneness, and that thing that pulled our attention to look into the abyss. That abyss was the sacred feminine. That was this desire to take form. And we spoke about this. And as soon as you looked down, you started to fall.
Right.
Gravity took care of you. And that started the cycle of necessity, which is the cycle of the soul. That looking down, and then the pull. Well, that's the pull into, you are going through the transformer right there. You are getting pulled down into reality. And that started this episode of consciousness that has continued to this day, to where we're best friends chatting with each other.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
And we kind of brought this up in rituals. We sort of talked about that. And I think you even talked about it. There's something in the Hermetica that talks about the rituals in magic, and how the representation in magic has this sort of like understanding of squares and with the circle, like having both. And I love that what you're saying about having the respect of all four elements. If you're not completely in alignment with nature, nature will find a way to punish you. And so it's absolutely. Like this not an illusion, but this perception of like what magic has to have this greater understanding that we're talking about right now before you can even use that energy for good or even evil. I mean, even like we talked about it with the Luciferians is, even before we talked about Luciferians, we talked about those who use this sort of power for good or for evil. Both of them still have the same understanding and respect for what is actually happening, though.
Oh, most definitely.
Or else it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. So good point with the respect there. That was like the best term. I think that was a great way to.
I remember you and I've talked about this. You're like, hey man, just because it's being used for wrong doesn't mean that those people don't also acknowledge what those who use it for good do as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And even there's, you get into kind of what people kind of perceive as the agendas of the elite, and they believe that they are doing the great work, and that's an interesting thing to kind of.
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's an interesting conversation that maybe someday we'll be able to have.
We should definitely have the conversation one day. That was something I never really. I mean, when I was a kid, and we would have these after school. When I was in Catholic school, we'd have these after school sort of like open discussions with like some of our teachers that were teaching things beyond Bible study, which is like the morale of humans. One of them, I remember, and it really haunted me at the time because I was a kid. It was so hard for me to grasp what he was saying, but I understand obviously later on what he meant, which is that neutrality. And like there's whether it's for good or for evil, there's still a neutrality in the idea of the respect of what is occurring. And I was like, no, that makes no sense, because if you're against the idea of God or the idea of like what is actually occurring for the greater good, then you shouldn't have the key to open that door. And he's like, no, actually people know how to open that door, even if it is for the wrong, if they have a greater understanding of what we're talking about right here.
Right.
And I was like, I just remember I don't know what grade I was in, but I was like, no, you're wrong. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, I remember this guy was telling me, this teacher who taught religious studies, he was saying like, hey, like I'm just telling you how it is in the natural world. Like there are people who have this understanding. And I remember just thinking like, and so back to what you just said, that those who are doing the wrong or the evil do still believe they're doing it for the greater good, for the greater cause. And yeah.
You know, and I don't mean to use the word elites there, because I don't want to sound like a 1% kind of person. Just, you know, dark Luciferians.
Yeah, I know,
because there is some individuals that have really, through their own will, become very successful, and they're all about consciousness expansion.
Yes.
So you know, it kind of brought up the kind of conversation too about like the baby versus the prize fighter. Even though the prize fighter could be arrogant, he could be, you know, a bad family individual, he could speak badly about everybody. That doesn't mean that the baby in the boxing competition is going to win because he's pure and wholesome. Like the prize fighter is still going to win that fight, and it's not just, even though that baby was adorable. You know what I mean? Right. And again, we're not promoting that at all, but like just that understanding, right?
I know what you mean.
Yeah. You know, and so, you know, you brought up a great point too about magic, man. I saw that slipping from the mind, and I could just totally see that making the notes.
No, let's bring it back.
Let's bring it back, because, you know, it is interesting how this conversation is really just an extension of not only the rituals, but Lucifer and kind of the esoteric significance of blood, because we were kind of talking about electricity and how blood kind of is that conductor, right? And so when you think about that, where do you conduct all your magic rituals from? In a circle, you know, and you are the 5-pointed star with your 2 legs, your 2 arms, and your head. You are the magician working within that realm. And so the circle is the same. You are partaking in that, and it's actually your movement in that kind of squares the circle, and you're almost kind of making your own manifestation. And again, that's why you balance it out with the elements, and you take it through that process. You know, and just again, these vessels are a way to see God in motion and to experience this universal life force. And this is, you know, again, we really kind of understand too that we're a pulled down transformer too. So when we were kind of talking about the 2 zodiac, this is the aspects too of the stars and how they're connected to us, you know, and we're moving around stars. And that's exactly what we are. We're moving around stardust. And that's not something we, I think, give ourselves enough credit for or really understand it. But this consciousness and this reconnection back to that circle, right, and that all giving, all loving energy of universal creation. Again, this is our birthright. This is what we were born into, and this is the ultimate goal in life, is to reconnect to that. And again, finding the beauty in the material and understanding that, but understanding that this creation is used for the expression, the expansion, and the evolution of consciousness. Right. And that's kind of what we're kind of looking at, you know, and it's the different clothing of God, you know, and how it makes up everything, and also the energy that powers it through. You know, the light bulb is the vessel, right? And that would represent the manifestation of this energy. The energy that comes through and lights up that light bulb, well, that's that universal life force, right? And that's at a higher wattage than the bulb, right? Because it kind of fits within it, and that's exactly how it is, the proper wattage, and you know, your wattage. But let's think about that, you know, especially again in North America, you've got a face there on your faceplate. Anytime you're actually plugging electricity in, think of it as that controlling of electrons, which is, those electrons are the creative aspect, that one thing in alchemy. It's the base of all. It's the lowest common denominator, right? That's what you're controlling when you plug into the face of God. And like, look, it's 2 slits in a mouth. Like, it couldn't be any more. And when you ground that, and that's a grounded outlet that we're looking at right now, when that's grounded and you're grounded with the flow with God, that's when you're walking with universal consciousness. And that's what puts you in alignment. And this is what, when we hear stuff in like the New Age movement of like, go with the flow, and it's all about the vibes, there's deep aspects to those words. And I know it gets printed on shirts and people just like kind of stop, you just kind of start reading it without thinking it. But there's a really, really deep connection there. You know, there's a really, really deep beauty in understanding that fire that lights up these vessels. And even when the vessel loses that fire, how quickly Mother Nature kind of recycles it, and how it's
Absolutely.
always recycling. But the universal Father can it just kind of spills over, and even, you can even think about that with, how individuals utilize, like their energies, and how it can kind of, a lot of times we're just spilling over our creative electrical power of ourselves and not giving it vessels for expression. Right. And how many times do we do that? How many times do we just spill energy over, and again, like, not to call everybody out, but like young men, how often do you spill that cup up, and what vessel are you actually putting that creative energy in? Same thing with females, like, sexual energy is that energy that kind of pulls it together. Also your mental energy. How many times is that spilling over? Your physical attention of what you're paying attention to. How many times is that spilling over? Are you actually giving it a vessel to explore this aspect of consciousness, or is it just kind of spilling onto the table? And it's infinite. So you can kind of always spill it, but you're never going to be able to create. You're never going to take it to that next step. You're never going to impregnate that aspect of a thought to be able to make it manifest and come into our lives. And that's what we're kind of looking for here. And so really thinking of ourselves as spiritual electricians and understanding that this energy is working through us, and we're just kind of turning up this transformer, to be able to perceive and climb a higher realm. And you don't have to climb a mountain to know the higher you get, the better the air.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so we follow this up. We follow the Jack's Beanstalk. What's
Right.
Jack's Beanstalk? That's your spinal column. And you have to climb it to the top. And there's going to be monsters, and you're going to face demons. But you're going to use this universal creation and this understanding of the mother and the father that's protecting you on this path. And you're going to be, valiant against these aspects and these obstacles. And so it's just this like beautiful thing to just even think about. And, even if you're, to formulate this idea, like, or to kind of formulate this conversation, I stared at a cactus for like 3.5 hours yesterday. Like, just like thinking, like, not just like blank staring. I mean, at some points it probably was, but just like looking at how that energy and like the shapes it took, the
Right.
form, how it has these little spikes on the side. And again, it's like this beautiful aspect, of how the feminine component of us calls out for attention. Look at my form. Look at my curves. Look at my beauty. Mm-hmm. And we do, like, that's even when there's a beautiful male like walking by and you notice him, you're like, wow, that person is stunning. Like, male or female, depending on what your attraction is, that it doesn't mean that a man can't be beautiful. It's pulling out a female component of like pulling your attention to be like, wow, look at that person. They're doing that's amazing. But that pulling attention, that's i.e. creation, i.e. manifestation, which is this feminine component. And it's the vessels for this non-localized energy to become localized.
Right.
So non-localized energy that's everywhere and all permitting to become localized, experienced, understood, and incorporated.
Well said, man. Well said, 100%. No, I really want to, like, when you talk about the spillage, I think that's something that we need to really take into consideration. I mean, me personally, and I'm sure, my wife won't appreciate me saying this, she's like, oh, that's our private life. But I always want to like use myself as an example.
I'm shaking my head right now, Lindsay. I'm saying no, Eddie.
No, don't say it. No, I'm just saying, like, there are times where in nature, I feel like the containment that we have, so this container that we have, say the four walls in the square, they're so well secured and they're so well preserved, I should say, that what to do with the energy inside becomes more and more difficult, and it has to become a discipline as to what to do with that energy. And me, as the male in the relationship with her, I feel like I build up the energy, but rather than like finding a way to purposefully, let it operate at a higher vibration, it spills over into something less important. And she notices that. And sometimes it just needs validation. And sometimes she just needs to say like, hey, maybe this isn't something you should be so concerned with, or so, how do I say, sort of like, it's just misplaced energy. And she calls it out so quickly. And that's all I really wanted to say. But I like the spillage you're talking about. So if we could learn more about how to find that container for that energy and use it for good, use it for a higher purpose, that spillage won't occur.
Right.
that's all I was really going to say about that. But I feel like she always is the one who can like read between the lines a lot quicker. And, you know, I've always said this to you as a friend and other people that I've known in my life that have been having some kind of issue like that. And I could say like, what ails thy brother, you know, like what is really the issue here? And I really just think it's a misplacement of that energy and not really having the understanding of that squaring the circle, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I didn't divulge much about my life there. Just saying,
no, that was
it's
beautiful.
just nice to have a partner who can always like call it out and say like, hey, you know, I think this battle isn't worth fighting, or this like energy is misplaced, you know?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the spillage, it just sort of like resonates with me and how it can be better assessed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that was a great point. And you know, one of the things we talk about with these vessels of how we need vessels for this energy to experience, and so it doesn't, you know, cause trouble inside internally, right? It needs these expressions. We've talked about how desires need expressions. And understanding too that your vehicles are going to evolve that need these expressions, and we're going to kind of maybe put new squares to different circles at different times in our life and have to adjust that housing.
Oh, well said,
you know,
dude.
and kind of look at that pattern and be like, well, this housing sent up for this, it grounded this energy here and it kind of squared the circle, but at one point in my life, but now I need to adjust that, you know? And so again, looking at this like electrician, and you can actually get into chop talk. Like if you know an electrician, just talk to them. Like with this idea in mind, they don't even have to be spiritual. Just talk to them about how housing's electricity is set up. And it's going to be one of the best downloads you've ever had, because you're going to see exactly how the system works, how we open up, you know, how we open up terminals, how we close terminals, how this energy kind of just flows through us. And we are that conductor. Right. And we are that copper. And, you know, and just look about how awesome, like if you want to have any understanding of how awesomeness this energy is without form, well, look what happens when electricity moves through water. It will kill you.
Right.
You know what I mean? It will literally cook you. And and you would think that in the most purest sense it wouldn't, but there's not enough, you know, container for that with that water. So that electricity is going to find it. It needs to be channeled appropriately,
right? You
know, with responsibility, with care and prestige, and mostly with grace. And that's really where we come in when we think about how do we as alchemists connect to this. And again, this is just approaching the idea of squaring in a circle. We really actually didn't kind of break it down visually, which is so funny because it's such a deep symbol.
Outer circle, then you have the triangle, then you have the square, and then you have the circle, and then the outer circle is like the universe, and then the inner circle is like our universe. And there's so many different ways to like interpret this in alchemy. But I really do think like, I mean, I know we're just touching the surface on this, but I still think you've done a beautiful job of sort of understanding the more important thing that lies within that diagram. So again, if you look at the circle, or if you look up like in the Hermetica, you can see the symbol of what we're talking about, the square and the circle, and you're like, oh, this is what they're talking about. But we're really talking more of what's going on within the triangle, within the deeper purpose of this drawing that people have been sort of but have been describing for many centuries, you know, with this whole not equation, but this sort of like unsolved problem, if you will. You know?
Yeah, no, man, it's so interesting. And, you know, again, even biologically, when we just think of it in simple ideas of like, well, who gave you your body? Your mother,
right?
You know what I mean? And we spoke about that with the esoteric significance and the connection we have with our mother, or this chariot, the chariot, which is your body. I mean, it's the chariot of your soul, you know, and we kind of think about that aspect, you know, and how, you know, not only does the, you know, the feminine pull out these essences of creation for experience, but even how the feminine pulls out the essences within us, you know, and even how like taking into, you know, you think about the aspect of like the effects of alcohol and cannabis. Well, people do that too. There's a desire to kind of pull out this other essence of themselves and kind of put that on display.
Exactly.
And again, so like there's just so many levels and layers to this aspect of how we interact in our relationship with creation.
That's so important, man. I feel like I had to cut you off right there just because like you in this episode, you know, Daniel and I have talked about conversations we have before we hit record or after we hit record, but here on this episode right now, you're kind of having a realistic, like in real time, like how Daniel and I sort of talk. And again, I don't mean to cut you off, but you've been dropping a lot of very important notes. I really feel like I should be like pulling out my notebook right now, because like I want to go back to this. And like even what you just said about, the substances we used in order to draw out something of ourselves that's sort of underneath the surface is a beautiful thing to bring up, because I feel like that in itself doesn't have quite the understanding, or individuals don't have quite an understanding of why you even do that. I mean, you've talked to people before where they're like, oh, I just one day started using this substance, and they never even took the time to ask, like, what was I drawing out of myself that felt oppressed or suppressed? So I think that's awesome that you're saying that, man, because that's completely true.
Yeah, and again, man,
that feminine energy you're talking about, or just like the essence you're talking about, that's over there.
And just working with those essences, and understanding how this Mother Nature works within us and outside of us. And yeah, man, I think we kind of knew that approaching this conversation, that this was going to be something that not only were we excited to talk about, but we knew that this is going to be kind of a topic that's going to kind of carry on through the study of the Bible, obviously the study of Gnosticism, and just kind of everything that we're approaching in these next couple months, as conversations.
Man. Yeah. No, I love this topic. I think that it sort of has lended itself to, again, open another door that we're going to, keep going through. I mean, we said that with the 7 stages of alchemy, that we weren't done just yet, or even when we talked about the lost principle, and having that generative force, like we're going to keep doing this. And I think just like the circle we talk about inside of the square, it's like, it's never really going to end as far as how we bring up another topic that sort of circumvents or comes right back to, everything that we're trying to do here for ourselves in the physical world, as well as what, above us and in the outer world of the square,
Right. And again, I think, when we kind of, again, think about it in this universal alchemical aspect, again, the universal alchemical aspect of God is androgynous. And again, it's separating up these ideas so we could understand them. But again, we have to understand that the common denominator is this wholeness. That's the completeness of everything.
Right.
And so we say the word, this is universal Father, universal Mother, but it's the same thing. We're just talking about the night and the day, the up and the down, to get the most complete picture as possible.
Oh, I love it, dude. Well, anything else you want to add to that? I mean, I have, again, another couple pages of all this, but I feel like what you've covered so far is just exactly what I had in mind in regards to, especially with the feminine energy. I really wanted to bring that up. And I want to do more episodes on that, on really the distinction between the two and how it all encompasses into one, especially all coming from the female. I think that's great that you said that.
Yeah.
And again, we're not specific to the gender roles that most people out there might think we're talking about, but that'll come as you listen to our episodes. You'll understand, like, oh, I see what they're meaning by these definitions, or what they mean by these definitions. So yeah, I have nothing else to add to that. I really just enjoyed listening to what you had to say. Cause again, if you want to learn more about it, I'm sure you can, just search it on the internet as far as like squaring the circle goes.
Right.
I like the Hermetica. I like to use that just as a point of reference, but there's so much more to that, and especially with other authors in alchemy that have brought this up and have an understanding of it. And just even looking at the diagram itself is really powerful. You kind of like get lost into that, sort of like the mandala.
Perfect. You just said it right there, man. That's an Western mandala right there. And you just completely said it, that you can take this, and we didn't even approach that today, as a whole meditation exercise. And you kind of focus on all parts, and then you pull in the whole, which is kind of funny because that's exactly what we were just talking about, of taking the multiple parts and connecting that whole universal androgynous understanding.
Well, what you did with the cactus, I thought was a great example of that.
Oh, and that was very interesting, Matt. And that was so unique, and again, Mother Nature just like pulls this out of you. And again, I speak about the psychedelic experiences. Not saying I've ever did any, but that's a lie. There's this desire and there's this excitement that nature gives you in that moment of like, look at me, like, look how beautiful I am. And you like really resonate with that. And when you kind of start thinking about that, you're like, I wasn't making that up. Like, that's just something I don't tap into. Now,
Yes.
we've talked about the energy that comes off of, plants and stuff and how it's a little bit more sensitive in that realm. But this is what we're doing. Like, there's this enjoyment for this pulling in and this expression of universal energy. And it wants to express for us because the reason why it's a vehicle is to be perceived by us.
Right.
Because we are climbing the ladders of consciousness. Again, we're not at the top, not even close. But within this realm, we have responsibility because we are the highest consciousness in this 5-sense reality that we find ourselves in currently.
I love it, man.
Dude, I love you.
I love you too.
And so are we gonna chat before the holidays, or is this what's even the date today?
So today is the 16th.
Okay.
So I think we'll have
We'll totally chat before the holidays.
Yeah, and I'll be back. I'm gonna be out of town for a few days, and I'll be back late Monday night. So I think right after that,
cool.
we'll do something before the holidays come, and we'll yeah. I have a few ideas that I was gonna run by you, and we'll talk after the episode. But we're almost approaching that end of the year. So it's kind of crazy.
The end of the calendar year kind of coming up, and always if individuals are traveling as well as yourself, Eduardo, safe travels.
Thank you.
Loving journeys. May Sagittarius have your back like they do, and Jupiter. And but yeah, we're looking forward to just kind of, again, I think there's just such a unique horizon of topics still to come. And then we still got to go back. Like when I was listening to that Venus episode, I'm like, I don't even say anything I liked. I was like, I want to go back. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and we've said that even after episodes where we flip a thing of notes and you're like, oh, dude, I forgot that I had this whole thing.
Page,
and we're like, oh my gosh. So we got to come back.
Well, we will. I mean, it's evident to you, the listener, when you make comments about how digestible this information is based on the fact that Daniel and I are able to sort of condense so much information. But we're also very aware that we're doing that when we're doing it, because if we did, we'd have these episodes go on for like 3 hours. And I'm sure there's people out there who are great fans who'd be like, do it, 3 hours. I got the time.
Right.
But in reality, I feel like I personally like the way we've done this. So I think we should definitely eventually talk to the fans, talk to other individuals, and to ourselves, you and I, about which topics we can sort of do a 2.0 on or a part 2 on. And we've done that. We did it with time, and I think we're going to do another episode on time eventually. And then, man, there's a lot, and I don't want it all to get away. And then of course, every time I listen to an old episode, I'm like, why didn't we bring this? And I'm like, okay, there'll be a space for that. So I'm excited,
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Well, cool, man. Until next time, I guess.
Until next time.
Excellent, dude.